Hi, I'm Ashlei Laing.
And I'm Felix Bivens.
We're co-founders and co-directors of the Regenerative School, a micro-sized nonprofit university. Here we believe in the power of small to help heal the world. Founding a micro-university was a quest of discernment, successes, failures, and immeasurable learning, 20 years in the making for each of us. I've always held close to my heart the dream of creating a paradigm-shifting alternative university that was about living closer to Mother Nature, connecting mind, body, and soul, and as we now say, head, heart, and hands.
Since my own time in university, I wanted to create a new kind of college where students could learn differently and engage directly with the crises our world is facing: poverty, environmental collapse, and war.
We had heard about each other through friends in the Peace Corps network. Finally, we met in the desert of rural Rajasthan in India. There we quickly realized we held similar dreams for creating a new university for transformative learning. Our work builds on the mantra of thinking globally, acting locally. Our belief is that small-scale action is the catalyst for large-scale change.
Ashlei and I are children of the 80s. Growing up, we heard constantly about the need to be more sustainable. However, what that boiled down to often was simply doing harm to the environment more slowly. The framing here is that humans are inevitably bad for the planet. What has inspired us about the regenerative perspective is that humans and the ways that we live don't have to be inherently destructive to the environment, that we can work and live symbiotically, collaborating in natural cycles that leave the planet in better condition than before, not worse. That has inspired us to think about what healing cycles and systems at the micro and macro scale look like, and how these can add abundance rather than depleting resources from the places where we live and the planet as a whole. So we'll begin today with healing and regenerating the outer landscape, everything that is outside of us as humans, the environment, the land on which we live, the communities in which we live, and how the micro and the regenerative apply to these.
The most concrete examples come from the practices of regenerative agriculture that mimic natural cycles in the environment. If we look at our current agricultural practices, they resemble more mining than farming. They are inherently extractive and remove and degrade more than they replenish. Specifically speaking, conventional agriculture strips the land of its organic matter, exposing bare soil to the elements, increasing its oxidation and killing off trillions of its microorganisms. Soil microorganisms are truly micro. 1 teaspoon of healthy soil contains approximately 100 million to 1 billion soil bacteria. And these are just one of many powerful microorganisms living in the soil that make life possible. Most chemical fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides are known to be destructive to these microorganisms, and over time, their use leaves soil lifeless, compacted, cracked, and easily eroding. In the US alone, soil is eroding 10 times faster than it's being replenished, and this is a global problem. The UN states that in the next 60 years, the world's productive topsoils will be completely eroded if things don't change.
In contrast to the current industrial system of agriculture that Ashlei has just described, our ancestors and indigenous peoples tended the earth through permanent, perennial systems of agriculture, which were self-reproducing. Systems that grew, matured, and became more productive each year. Systems with life cycles that lasted several human generations rather than just a few months. This approach to agriculture requires a complete shift in perspective, away from simply focusing on the monocrop species that we're growing, to instead looking at the environment as a whole, and in particular, turning our attention towards soil health. Conventional agriculture focuses on feeding the plant, not feeding the soil. Regenerative approaches flip this totally upside down. In the regenerative perspective, the soil is the mother that grows the plant, not fertilizers or other synthetic inputs.
As Felix points out, this is a key shift in perspective for this approach. And with this perspective in mind, we can ask the questions: how do we cultivate soil as our primary goal? How do we rebuild the substructure on which every living thing stands? So many of these practices are about healing broken nutrient cycles in the soil, answering how each planting and each harvest add nutrients and fertility back into the soil rather than reducing it. We can do this by supporting those natural microorganisms living in the soil that give it its natural fertility.
We can do this in a variety of ways, such as cover cropping rather than tilling, where the farmer is laying down the current growth and seeding directly into that biomass so that it decomposes to feed the new growth. This helps to ensure the stability of the soil, reducing erosion and reducing rainwater runoff. We can also do this by composting waste streams back into the nutrient cycle. Many cities and municipalities take organic matter like leaves and grass clippings and bury these in landfills. These are materials that naturally build soils. They can be composted rather than thrown away. If we don't follow these natural processes, we end up needing to replace those lost nutrients with chemicals, fertilizers, things that give a temporary boost of productivity to the soil, but ultimately kill off those soil microorganisms that give the soil its long-term health, structure, and vitality. In the regenerative perspective, we recognize that these vital resources and nutrients are close by and part of the local landscape. They may need to be moved around, the rates of decomposition may need to be accelerated through hot composting and other techniques, but those resources are there, ready to speed the rebuilding of abundance. These are the natural, slow processes through which the soil was originally formed. We're simply observing nature and mimicking her processes.
One specific example is the Urban Microfarm at our headquarters in Fayetteville, Tennessee. The Urban Microfarm, affectionately known as the Love Garden, is a regenerative project. It's a small urban garden with 3 raised beds, compost bins, an herb spiral, and loads of flowers attracting pollinators to the food crops. We practice sheet mulching to regenerate the soil as well as rainwater harvesting. We grow organic, chemical-free food that helps feed families in our community. It's an educational resource that invites community members to grow food, rebuild soil, and live closer to Mother Earth regeneratively. This is what it looked like just 6 years ago. An urban brownfield with a shoe repair shop buried underneath. This is what it looks like today.
We also apply these concepts and practices of regeneration to whole communities. For us, it's not just about farming or ecosystems. As with land, regenerating communities is about making sure the vital resources are there and available for all. Food, water, shelter. Those micro-level needs that are necessary for all people to develop and lead healthy, happy lives. And our work focuses not just on material needs, but also upon the need to participate, to actively contribute to one's own community and shape one's life with autonomy and agency. We see all of these processes as layered and connected, where a project like the Love Garden is initially about rebuilding soil. This leads to the creation of fresh, healthy food, which supports healing in the community. And this in turn provides opportunities for people to show up and shape that community as they believe it should be. As Leah Penniman, the co-founder of Soul Fire Farm in upstate New York, often says, by reconnecting with the soil, we heal the planet and ourselves.
We've been speaking a lot about healing the planet, what we're calling the outer landscape. And now we'd like to invite you into the space of the inner landscape, about healing ourselves, what we call in permaculture, zone 0, and what we call at cultivating peace within. And on that note, let's just take a moment to recognize how difficult 2020 was for everyone. For example, 84% of Americans report the pandemic and other events of the past years as having created severe stress in their lives, leading to prolonged feelings of depression, anxiety, and anger. The pandemic and the social justice reckoning here in the US brought up a lot of difficult challenges. It was as if the universe was asking us, inviting us to slow down and pay attention, despite our resistance and our struggle.
The pandemic showed us as a collective that we need to work on the inner conflicts, anxieties, and traumas that we inherently carry, whether historical, generational, racial, or political. It's essential that we normalize making time for inner healing practices. These are micro-level journeys, what the poets have called the journey of 1 inch. From our perspective, these are just as important as rebuilding soil, and in many ways similar. They're important for our own well-being. They also help us to discover our skills and gifts that we can bring to our people and communities for healing and regeneration. Slowing down from our fast-paced, productivity-driven world is paramount for people, places, and planet to thrive in peace and abundance. Slowing down allows you to be more present in your own body with your strengths, weaknesses, and feelings, more true to yourself, more attuned to others, grounded in the body, and more balanced to show up in contexts of conflict and strife. The pandemic also required us to rethink our culture and ethos as a micro-university working to build a more just, peaceful, and sustainable world. What will our students need to be able to cope with such a dynamic and uncertain future? What can we offer them to help them in their work as community activists and healers in this incredibly difficult environment?
In particular, we've been looking at the practices of embodied social justice, including somatic techniques, mind-body techniques, such as mindfulness and meditation, breath work and yoga, movement, tapping, sound baths, etc. Practices that have been created by and utilized by indigenous cultures for thousands of years. In my privileged experience, these practices allow for a more grounded way of being in body and nature, inviting a person to learn kinesthetically, more grounded in their nervous system, more sensory attuned and socially, emotionally aware.
Grounding down into safer, braver spaces where they can connect more deeply with each other in their learning experience. And as we thought more about this learning experience, and particularly related to trauma, and the kinds of students that we have had and will have in our programs, in particular BIPOC, queer, neurodivergent, and differently abled individuals who experience trauma daily in a world that devalues and negates them much of the time. It's important for us to recognize their experience, expertise, and knowledge in dealing with trauma and how they have battled to overcome it. We need to be humble about what we can offer them, recognizing that we're all learners and we're all teachers to each other. Now, back home here in Tennessee, we are reminded of how these many processes are all connected, from the micro to the macro, from the inner to the outer, from soil to soul, from communities to climate. We remain committed to working with small rural communities because they're often overlooked vis-a-vis large cities, and because rural areas are often more tied to the soil and agricultural livelihoods than urban areas. If we can help to catalyze a regenerative renaissance in nature-based farming in small towns across the U.S. and beyond, those thousands of towns and millions of acres will add up to big changes for people, places, and planet.
Likewise, if we can catalyze a regenerative renaissance in higher education that engages with the critical issues of our time, as a standard pedagogy for university students to connect head, heart, and hands, body to mind, local to global, those thousands of students, those at RE and those at other institutions, will each be able to bring their experience and expertise back to regenerating the communities to which they belong and wish to serve. None can do it alone, but together, their efforts will add up to even bigger changes for people, places, and planet.
Finally, and most importantly, in both the inner and the outer landscape, that which regenerates does not come from the outside. The material resources for change, the self-knowledge for change, were always there, waiting to be recognized, utilized, and transformed. As Kentucky poet-farmer Wendell Berry has written, "What we need is here."
And we pray not for a new earth or a new heaven, but to be quiet in heart and deny clear. What we need is here.
Thank you.